China defended its policies in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and Tibet, calling criticism from 39 countries at the UN a smear campaign and interference in its domestic affairs. Why has the issue sparked such controversy again? What geopolitical factors are at play? And extreme poverty will rise this year for the first time in over 20 years, says the World Bank, due to coronavirus. What can be done to reverse the setback? Welcome to The Point. Coming to you from Beijing, I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xin. 39 countries, led by Germany, criticized China's policies in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and Tibet on Tuesday at a UN meeting on human rights. The statement, mostly signed by Western countries, expressed, quote, grave concerns about the human rights situation in Xinjiang and the recent developments in Hong Kong, and it urged China to respect human rights. China defended its policies, calling the criticism part of a smear campaign, but also ordering countries to put their own houses in order first. Nearly 70 countries also made statements supporting and echoing China's position. Why has China's domestic policies sparked international controversy, and how can China fight the Western-dominated narrative on these issues? Joining me for the discussion from Shanghai is Professor Shen Yi from the School of International Relations and Public Affairs at Fudan University, and from Washington, D.C. by Dr. Stanley Kober, former research fellow in foreign policy studies at Cato Institute. Dr. Shen, let me go to you first, but before I do, I wanted to read you this statement. The statement signed by 39 countries urged China to allow UN rights observers immediate, meaningful, and unfettered access to Xinjiang, where China said its minority Muslim Uyghurs are getting vocational training to improve their work prospects. But critics have called these centers detention camps. It also accused China of restricting religious freedom, forced labor in Xinjiang. They also called on Beijing to uphold the rights and freedom of Hong Kong, where they say political oppression is occurring after the new national security law. China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Zhang Jun, responded on Tuesday that says they once again abused the UN platform, politicized the issue of human rights, and provoked confrontation, and they once again interfered in China's internal affairs and spread misinformation in the United Nations. Professor Shen, your thoughts on the Western narrative and China's counter-argument?
I think that their narrative is a little bit ridiculous. I tell you a real story. About 2009, January, I was in D.C. One day I go to the Congress to participate in a hearing on so-called Uyghur issues. I go there about 30 minutes earlier. Only very few journalists come there. I asked a dialogue with the journalists. They told me that just 2 months before that hearings, no single journalist can properly spell out the term Uyghur, but they got the strong lobbies from a pro-Israel lobby groups in Washington. And then they got money, funding, training, and those manipulated information and the knowledges, what happened in Xinjiang. That's all the stories. And such kind of stereotype and narratives based on very fixed misinformation, manipulate the pieces of information to fulfill some very special detailized either ideological requirement or domestic political requirement. They do not really concern the human right. They even don't have enough capacity to care about their own people's life domestically, but go to China to serve as kind of human rights instructors. So I think that's the reason why China launched quite a tough counterback on these issues.
Very interesting perspective there. Dr. Kober, why do you think there's such a disconnect when it comes to the Western narratives and China's own, counter narratives?
The disconnect is reminiscent of the Cold War. Then we spoke about moral clarity. We emphasized the human rights issues. But the moral clarity wasn't just criticisms. I was a student in the Soviet Union when the Helsinki Final Act was signed. We were able to have some negotiations, some discussions with the Soviet Union, reach an agreement, this was an all-European, basically, agreement, which created the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. We don't have anything similar like that now. And what I would like to see, ideally, drawing from that experience, maybe we could have a similar dialogue now, because that was very effective by the late 1980s in reconciling the United States and the Soviet Union. There are different interpretations of human rights. We do have the Universal Declaration. We have the Helsinki Final Act. Maybe we could have a similar negotiation organization for Security and Cooperation in Asia. If we could do that during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, I would hope we could be able to do something like that now.
Right. This year's proposal statement was initiated by Germany. At last year's UN event, the UK actually spearheaded a similar statement. So my next question to both of you is, why do you think Germany led this round of accusation against China? Dr. Shen.
I'm not sure what Germany's real intention, but generally speaking, sometimes Germany in the European Union to have strong domestic political requirement on these ideological issues to prove their special values and their special positions in today's global international systems in the background that the relatively unstoppable decline of their real power and capacities in the world. On the other side, maybe it's kind of important movement they providing to fix the cross-Atlantic relationship destroyed by Trump administrations because of these stupid, isolated, hegemonic policies. The German has been pushed away, and they want to use these highly ideological discriminations to blame China, such kind of blame games to fix their own friendship.
I want you to look at some figures too. According to China's official data, Xinjiang's poverty rate has dropped from 19% in 2014 to around 1% in 2019. And Tibet's GDP jumped from 174 million yuan in 1959 to around 148 billion yuan in 2018. And in Hong Kong, according to a poll by Hong Kong's Research Association, a total of 66% of respondents said they're either very supportive or, quote, supportive of the implementation of the national security law, and nearly 80% of people believe the law will not have a negative impact on the prospect of Hong Kong. Then, Dr. Shen, why do you think there are, these stories, these narratives, figures are not shared, are not promoted, even reported by the Western press?
Because they just don't care. What they really care is to find a reason and find a story to blame China. They use their own stereotypes to refix and rebuilding their understanding of the real world. They don't care, they have no interest in to the real improvement of the life, to the real people in Xinjiang. They even don't care the real life in their countries. They only care their game or the narrative game of the story of human rights. They try to use these terms, they speak these terms speak this term very loudly, and then they can put a finger toward you by speaking of these terms, and then they can get a success. That's what they need. They don't really care the real development. They don't care the real lives in Xinjiang. They don't care real lives. They only care their human rights verbal games.
Well, there's also an interesting response from China's Foreign Ministry on Wednesday that says some Western countries have bad human rights record. How are these countries in any position to blame China? China will not accept an instructor on human rights and oppose double standards. That is according to China's Foreign Ministry. Dr. Kober, do you think the Western countries are in a position to be a human rights instructor to China? Why or why not?
That's actually biblical. let the person who is without sin cast the first stone. We do have our own human rights problems, and there's a saying, "Physician, heal thyself." We should. When I was on this program a few weeks ago, I mentioned the International Criminal Court investigation. They tried to investigate here on the issue of torture. I noticed just yesterday a story, some lawyers here have filed suit on that issue because they feel threatened by the U.S. government's attitude toward the International Criminal Court. So there is no question that these issues can be politicized. That's why I thought, first of all, if we can have a sort of dialogue the way we had during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, that would be useful. Second thing that occurred to me would be a pugwash sort of arrangement. Child of the Cold War, I think of these sorts of things. Pugwash was an arms control, but it wasn't official. It was like American and Soviet arms controllers would get together, and it kept the arms control alive. Then by the end of the Cold War, we had the INF Treaty. If, again, we could have something informal. I'm impressed by the number of Chinese students in our law schools. Whether that will continue now, given the relationship, I don't know. But that gives us a basis we didn't even have during the Cold War for addressing these issues, even on an informal basis, that I would hope could be a good foundation for some future discussion that would be more fruitful.
Sure, those are truly complicated issues. Professor Shen, nearly 70 countries actually made statements at the UN General Assembly supporting China's position on Xinjiang and Hong Kong. But Human Rights Watch, which is a famous group monitoring human rights situations around the world, says China's support list, the countries that support China, reads like a virtual who's who of leading rights abusers, including Russia, Syria, Cuba, Pakistan, and Venezuela. How do you look at that accusation?
I think this accusation is very clearly reflect their understanding of the human rights. The human rights in their terms is not real human rights, is their human rights. These human rights serves as kind of tools for diplomacy to identify or separate the countries in the world into different groups according to their interest and need, just like they play these identity politics domestically. They use these human rights and they want to monopolize the standard to judge the human rights, and they want to use these human rights to advance their national interest grouply. But on the contrary, finally leading to a very pathetic result. If you research these two groups, you will find those countries who want to blame China, even though they are well-developed and high human rights countries, they contribute the most part of the COVID-19 pandemic confirmed case and death case in the world. A little pathetic and ironic, ridiculous result.
All right, I want to thank you both for your perspectives. Professor Shen Yi from the School of International Relations at Fudan University, and also Dr. Stanley Kober, former research fellow at Cato Institute. Thank you both.